welcome to Jurassic Park for a minute. We'll be discussing the second Jurassic Park sequel, 1 minute at a time. I'm Brad.
I'm Dave.
And today we're back to discuss minute 36 of Jurassic Park 3. Dave, ready to get into it?
Good. Yeah.
Because we entered minute 35 of Jurassic Park 3. Paul had called Grant over to the clearing, where they were now standing, and Grant noticed something on the ground. As we open on minute 36, Grant slowly walks forward and crouches down the ground, and as the camera pans down, we see a nest of 13 eggs. At the 9-second mark, Grant stands up quickly and looks about himself, and notices more nests with eggs. At the 18-second mark, his eyes twitch, and he says, "Raptor," out loud, realising the trouble they're in. He turns around, looking at more nests, just as Billy arrives on the scene, packing up the remains of the parachute into its backpack. At the 28-second mark, we cut to them rushing through the jungle, trying to get as far away from the area as they can. As the rather familiar and eerie score from Jurassic Park plays in the background, Paul assures Amanda that we're going to find him. You hear me? We're going to find him. And then goes on about how resourceful Eric was. At the 41-second mark, Grant stopped and has looked back and says, "Where's Billy?" realising that his young protege is nowhere to be found. He starts rushing back through the foliage, retracing their steps. At the 49-second mark, he comes across Billy, closing the flap on his camera, and he says, "What are you doing?" Billy, looking guilty as hell, pauses for a moment, and then says, "I was taking photographs of the nest." Grant smiles and turns to start walking back towards the rest of the group. He says, "Well, don't do that again. If I lose you, it's just me and the damn tourists." And this ends minute 36 of Jurassic Park 3. As we went in the last minute, Paul Kirby had called Grant over to the clearing they were standing in, and said they've found something. And now, as we go into 36, we get Grant sort of slowly walking towards the camera and looking down at something on the ground, and a really scared look on his face as well. And you sort of notice here too, as the fog machine, or as he crouches down, the fog machine's going crazy in the background. I think a couple of minutes ago, Dave, you were saying how much they love to use this artificial fog.
Yeah, they do.
But the camera drops down to show us what Grant's looking at, and it's a nest holding 13 eggs, pristine, all sitting there. And he sort of gets up quickly and realises what he's looking at, and he looks to his right or left and sees another nest by a stream. It's got 12 in it, and then we flash to another nest by the creek that's got 12 in it as well, and then we move left again to another nest which also has 12 eggs. So bit of a pattern there of most of the nests having that 13 or 12 eggs in it.
Yeah.
But there's another nest a bit further away, you can't really see, it's blurry, so you don't really know how many eggs are in that. But the camera pulls in on Grant's face, and he looks to the right, breathes raptor, and it suggests that he's seeing more nests there as well, in other directions also. And then we cut down to 2 more nests as Billy arrives, packing the remaining bits of the parachute away into his bag. And both these nests have 12 eggs as well. And we sort of get that familiar bit of a flute played as what we got in Jurassic Park.
Yeah, this is one of the things that has been kind of consistent throughout, or at least one of the leitmotifs that have been consistent throughout this trilogy here, is the raptors using some kind of like fluty instrument to really be their leitmotif. In the first Jurassic Park movie, Hatching Baby Raptor, we get kind of the choral vocals and with an underlying flute sound. And then in The Lost World, we get the return of the flute, and it's like not as high pitched as the compies, but it's kind of similar. You hear it when Dieter, and we brought this up when we covered The Lost World Minute. You can hear when Dieter is kind of scratching around in the bush, and before the compy jumps out at him. You also hear it when, a bit more prominently, when Ludlow brings up the raptors in the ruins of the engine camp.
Yep. A couple of things to bring up here. Firstly, I mentioned a couple of minutes ago when we first see Billy start to fold up that parachute, I spent some time looking at some YouTube videos this past week on a correct way to fold up a parachute. I'm not going to say it's the same way. I'm sure they're all different, but the way he's folding it up here is nothing like the way you should actually fold up a parachute.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty involved process, making sure all your strings or your guidelines and that are all straight and not knotted or mixed in with all the others. And so later on when Billy gets to the aviary, he's going to fall down to the water. He's not going to be able to deploy that parachute. Especially here when we see him, he comes on screen here where he's just sort of stuffing the last little bit into the flap so he can close it up. But
I was going to say, I think with that, there's an interesting difference here of what we see with this nest and what we see, or what we read in The Lost World. Because in the Lost World novel, we find when the characters find the raptor nest, it's very, very chaotic. It's more similar to what we see of the quote-unquote Valley of Death in The Lost World when the characters slide down the hill and find them in that valley full of carcasses. Instead of what we see here, where this is kind of closer to what we find, or what the characters find under the, what was it, like a spillway or some kind of like subterranean bunker of some sort in the first novel.
Yeah, it was like flood works or something, underground flood prevention or something, like stormwater. Yeah.
And so it's more like that, where we see kind of developed nesting, where they've got these kind of eggs set out in something of like a semicircle around this little alcove in the trees they've hidden away in, and they're constructed of, looks like, twigs, mud, and leaves. And if you look inside the nest, it looks like they kind of place some moss around the eggs to kind of keep them settled and perhaps a little bit warm too, incubated. And it's very, very different from the entire pack structure that we find in the Lost World novel, where the raptors basically kind of instinctually, I guess, mate, lay the eggs, build a nest, but then they don't put any effort to take care of that nest. So the nest kind of just ends up getting trampled over, and any surviving eggs hatch, and any resulting babies that end up living are kind of left to fend for themselves.
Yeah, well, because there's no carcasses here. There's no sign that this is a carnivore's nesting site. As you said, the pristine eggs. Yeah, there's nothing that's been trampled. If the raptors have been fighting amongst themselves, there's no sign there. Even like just the mold, the mounds of dirt that the nests are made from are just like really. Obviously, someone sat there and made them look nice for the film, but there's no footprints. There's no nothing.
Which is interesting because even in Fallen Kingdom, we see Blue's nest. It's not really identified so much as that in the novel. In the film, but in the I think it was the Jurassic World website, the park website that they put together for the viral stuff for Jurassic World. They identify the area as Blue's Nest, and when you look around there, it's not just where the Explorer had been dropped at the bottom of the tree, but there's bones scattered all across that little clearing that she found.
And that's not to mention the Stegosaurus as well that's dead there.
Yeah, the Stegozilla, as I come to call it, is kind of off a ways from the nest. It was supposed to be, I think, actually spotted in. I think you can spot it in when they're leaving. It's behind one of the characters' shoulders. You can spot the plate or something. It was a very, very big prop. So I wouldn't be surprised if you could see it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of behind the scenes stuff come out in the recent weeks of sculptors and that working on that prop, and it just makes me. It'd be like back in the day them building the Tyrannosaur sick Triceratops, and
I said Triceratops. Yeah, Bill and the sick Triceratops, and just having that whole dialogue set piece take part at the gas-powered Jeep and not even having the Triceratops in shot.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's what they done. And it's odd too, because we never see any juvenile raptors, always fully grown. Maybe it's sort of implying these raptors are more, of course, more intelligent and they have more social skills and aren't as wild and ferocious as what they're described in the novels. But if that's the case, we should be seeing infants or juvenile raptors in these films as well. And yeah, so there might be, I don't know if there's been any suggestion that they might be nomadic in setting up nests in different areas of the island. This might be the first time they've set up the nesting area here, but even the fact there's no adults around, or with any shot of these people yelling and everything else, because we know later they follow them to the lab only because Billy's got the eggs. It's not as if they're hunting that far away from their nests at the time, but that's just a strange one. Especially when we don't see a lot of nesting sites or nests in general in these films.
Mm-hmm.
But we cut back to location, sitting there walking quickly through the jungle, and Paul's telling Amanda, we'll find the kid's got resources. Remember when we tried to ground him, which sort of alludes back to another past incident. I can only imagine that's climbing out the window or something if he'd been grounded.
That's what I imagine as well.
Yeah, do a little Bart Simpson swing out the window under the neighbouring tree.
Mm-hmm.
At the 29-second mark, Paul says we're going to find him, and it almost looks like a road or a path through the foliage behind him in the distance.
I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, just because they filmed a lot of it on kind of like off trails and side trails. You can see in the making of them setting up and moving equipment across the trails.
Yeah. I'll see if I can take some screen caps and post it up in the Facebook group.
Mm-hmm. And to be honest, they did the same with The Lost World, too. I think they kind of get away with it more for Jurassic Park just because it's a park setting and they can kind of justify it as that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But in The Lost World, like, literally that place where they take the break, and after Dieter goes missing, that's, like, literally just a trail they all just decided to sit down on.
Yeah, and this isn't a blatant, look, here's a road in the background either. You've really got to look to see it, and even then it might be just a long sort of grey tree laying down as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll see if I can get some photos of that. As the group moves on, we get Grant stopped and looking back, and then he realises Billy isn't with them and asks, where's Billy? And he starts back, and we don't really see if the others stop. Udesky sort of turns as Grant walks past him, but we don't see if the others stop and wait or not. But we cut to Billy walking slowly sideways, tending to his camera bag, and Grant asks, what are you doing? And Billy looks pretty guilty at this point, and then after a little bit says, I was photographing the nests. And then Grant smiles and starts heading back to the others and says, well, don't do that again. Billy says he's sorry. And as the minute ends, Grant says, if I lose you, it's just me and the damn tourists. Which is a great little line. So Billy didn't quite get caught in the act here. Grant come in a little bit too late as he's closing the flap on the bag, but we do realise later that he's stolen 2 eggs, I think it is.
Yeah, it is.
So again, sort of weaving that sort of Dogson storyline in, even though it's not them, sort of, by taking the eggs back. Billy says later you could have sold them and made a fortune enough to fund your dig for many, many years. So, But we'll get to that part a little bit later. Anything else that you want to talk to before we get to novel and script comparisons?
No, I think that was pretty well covered.
Alright, in the script, as mentioned before, it's Udesky that calls Grant over, and Billy sort of joins them as he's packing up the chute, and Grant brings up the rear, and Amanda sees 12 nests, football-sized eggs, can be seen in them, and Grant arrives last, and he identifies them with, in a horrid instant, that they're raptors. And as he says it, in the distance you can hear the cries of herbivores and the chorus of snarls. So in the script you actually get more audio like that background sound as he realises what they are, which would have been really cool.
That would have been more fun.
I wonder too, because there was a generation that this would have been their first Jurassic Park, and I'm sure if they were maybe 8, 7 or even 10, sort of that older children, they might not have seen Jurassic Park or The Lost World before it either, so I wonder just how much gravity Grant saying raptors would have had on the younger generation back then, seeing it for the first time.
Mm-hmm. I remember this wasn't. I was actually 8. I think we've discussed this before, but I was 8 years old when this movie came to theaters, and it was actually not my first Jurassic Park movie, but my first movie.
Yep.
My first Jurassic Park movie in theaters, and so, I mean, I knew the gravity. I knew what seeing raptors meant, and the death that followed them, especially after The Lost World.
But we cut to the group blasting through the jungle, and they're all trying to keep up with Grant because he's keeping a pretty fast pace, realising he wants to get as far away from those nests as he can. Amanda asks Paul what's a raptor, and Paul replies he doesn't know. Udesky thinks they're not that big compared to the egg size